My name is Maya Reeves. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years building a brand design business that Fortune 500 clients actually pay for. I've created visual identities for tech startups, restaurant chains, and a boutique hotel group that got featured in Architectural Digest. I know how to make something look like $1 million because I've charged close to that for the work. None of that prepared me for the Tuesday afternoon my brother's fiancé sent me a text that changed everything. Just so you know, the opening night guest list is locked. Marcus and I talked, and honestly, it would be weird having you there as a guest when you're technically working. You can come help in the kitchen and greet vendors. That makes more sense for everyone. I read it twice. Then a third time. Slower. Then I set my phone face down on my drafting table and stared at the wall for a long moment, the way you do when something that should hurt hasn't quite reached the nerve yet. My brother's restaurant. The one whose entire brand identity existed because of me. The logo I'd drawn by hand at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. The menu typography I'd spent 3 weekends refining. The website I'd built from scratch on a platform I already knew his fiancé would ask me to update every other week. The Instagram account sitting at 4,000 followers because I'd managed it for 8 months without being asked twice. Come help in the kitchen. I picked my phone back up and typed back. Slowly. Because I wanted to be clear. So I built the brand for the restaurant, but I'm not a guest at the opening? 3 dots appeared. Then, we just think it's cleaner this way. You know how you get around people. Marcus agrees. You know how you get around people. I've spent 6 years being the most professional person in every room I walk into, and somehow, in my own family, I was still the problem. The variable they needed to manage. Not the person who'd quietly logged over 300 hours of design work under a project folder I'd named, out of some dark humor, Family Rate 0. Here's what you need to know about how I got here, because this wasn't the first time. And if I'm being honest, I can trace the pattern all the way back to high school. I was the one who made the banners. Literally, my mom would say, "Maya's so artistic," and what that actually meant was, Maya will design the birthday invitations, the graduation program, the church bulletin, the neighborhood fundraiser poster, for free. Always for free. And always with a deadline. And always with revisions. When I started my business at 23 Reeves Creative LLC, registered in Austin, Texas, a domain I paid for, a client list I built cold. My family was supportive in the abstract way. People are supportive of things they don't fully understand. My dad called me a freelancer for 2 years after I hired my first employee. My mom introduced me at parties as her daughter who does computer stuff. When my brother announced he was leaving his finance job to open a restaurant, the whole family went electric with excitement. He had the vision, the culinary training from that year he'd spent cooking in Portland, and the charm that made strangers want to give him things. What he didn't have was a brand, a name, a visual language that could carry the concept from a logo on a window to a story people wanted to be part of. He called me the night he got the lease signed on the space in South Austin. "I need your help, Maya. Real help. I know this is what you do." And I said yes, the way I always said yes, because I loved my brother, and because part of me, the honest part, wanted to finally build something our family would point to and say, "She did that." Out loud, with my name attached. We shook hands, actually shook hands, over FaceTime, and I told him I'd do the full brand package at a rate I was embarrassed to call my family discount, which was 60% below what I charged real clients. He said he'd pay me in installments once the restaurant was generating revenue. I should have sent a contract. I built a folder instead, named it Brothers Restaurant Oleander, because that was the name we landed on after 17 rounds of brainstorming, and I started working. I'm telling you this so you understand the scale. The name, the logo, 2 versions, a primary mark and a secondary mark for merch. The color palette, a warm terracotta and deep olive green that photographed beautifully under both natural and artificial light. The menu design, which I restructured 3 times because my brother's fiancé kept changing the offerings and never once apologized for the turnaround. The website, which I built on Squarespace but coded custom sections into because the templates weren't doing the concept justice. The Instagram, which I ran as an admin because my brother said he didn't have time to learn the scheduling tools. The grand opening invitations, the staff uniform mock-ups, the signage specs I sent to the printer myself because I had a vendor relationship and could get them done at cost. 312 hours. $8,400 at my family discount rate. $0 paid. Not because my brother was cruel. He wasn't. He was distracted and optimistic, and had a fiancé who had moved into his apartment in January, and whose opinions had started arriving with the quiet authority of someone who had decided this was already her restaurant too. Her name was Diane. She was 31, sharp in the way that cut sideways rather than straight on, and from the moment she and my brother got serious, she'd looked at me the way people look at furniture they inherited and aren't sure they want to keep. She never said anything directly unkind. She was too precise for that. It was always small adjustments. Referring to the brand work as Maya's input, asking me to resend files I'd already sent twice because she'd misplaced them. Suggesting, in group texts with my parents, that maybe a real agency should review the website before launch, as though I weren't sitting there, a real agency owner, reading every word in real time. The first time she restructured my design work without telling me, swapped the font I'd specified for something she'd found on Pinterest and uploaded to the printer, I let it go. The second time, I mentioned it to my brother, and he said, "She just wants to be involved. It's her home too, in a way." I didn't say anything after that. 2 weeks before the opening, the invitations had gone out. The social media was building momentum. Local food blogs had picked up the story. A writer from the Austin Chronicle had done a short feature on the concept, and in the piece, the restaurant's distinct visual identity was mentioned as one of the things that made Oleander feel like a serious contender before it had served a single plate. My name was not in the article. I'd been mentioned to the writer. I know that because my brother told me, but Diane had handled the press contact, and apparently that detail hadn't made it to print. I told myself it didn't matter. Then came the text. "You can come help in the kitchen." I stared at the wall of my studio for a long time after that. Long enough for the late afternoon light to shift and my coffee to go cold, and my mind to do the thing it does when I'm working through a complex problem, break it into components, trace the dependencies, find the load-bearing structure. Here was the load-bearing structure. Every piece of work I had done for Oleander was created under Reeves Creative LLC. The logo, the menus, the website, the social media content, the signage files, under U.S. copyright law and the terms of any standard creative services agreement, the intellectual property in those assets belonged to my company until the client paid in full and took formal ownership. No payment had ever been made. No contract transferring ownership had ever been signed. Which meant Oleander's entire visual identity still legally belonged to me. I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was log into Squarespace and change the website to a password-protected maintenance page. I added a simple message. Site temporarily unavailable. Relaunch coming soon. Professional. Neutral. The kind of thing no one would question for at least 48 hours. Then I logged into the Instagram account, the one I had created, the one I was an admin on, and changed the login email to one only I had access to. 4,200 followers, 8 months of content strategy, a posting cadence I'd built from scratch, all of it under my digital keys. I called my printer contact, the one I'd used to get the signage done at cost, and told him there was a billing discrepancy on the Oleander account. I asked him to hold any future orders from that client until I cleared it up. He said sure, no problem, they were good with me. The menus were already printed, so I couldn't touch those. But the files on the server, every editable source file, every layered Illustrator document, every font license I'd purchased, lived in my Dropbox. I revoked the shared folder access. By 9 that evening, Oleander's opening night was 2 weeks away, and its entire brand infrastructure had quietly gone offline. Then I sent my brother a message, not to the family group chat, directly to him. I got a text from Diane this afternoon letting me know I'm not a guest at the opening. I thought you should know that I've paused access to the brand assets and accounts while we sort out the terms of the work. The IP on everything I created belongs to Reeves, Creative until payment and a formal transfer agreement are in place. This isn't a threat. It's just a fact I should have communicated more clearly from the start. Let me know when you want to talk. I put the phone down and went for a walk. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I genuinely want to know how far this story travels, because what happened in the next 2 weeks still surprises me when I think about it. The first call came from my brother at 10:15 that night. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that one go too. Then a text. Maya, what did you do? The website is down. Call me. I didn't. The next morning, my mom texted. I heard there's some kind of problem with the restaurant website. Can you just fix it? This is not the time for drama. Not the time for drama. The phrase could have been embroidered on a pillow in my childhood home, because I'd heard it my whole life. Always aimed at me, always when I'd noticed something that everyone else was pretending wasn't there. My dad's message was more pragmatic. Your brother is stressed. He's worked hard for this. Don't let some misunderstanding become a bigger issue than it needs to be. Some misunderstanding. 312 hours and $8,400. I'd done the math so many times it lived in my sleep. I responded to none of them. Instead, I worked. I had a real client rebrand due that week, a sustainable packaging company out of Denver, and I poured myself into their color system like it was the only thing on earth. It mostly worked. Diane called once. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail I didn't listen to for 3 days. The texts escalated in a rhythm I recognized, first confusion, then frustration, then the pivot to guilt. We have a reservation system that links to the website and it's showing an error page. That was my brother. The Chronicle writer just emailed asking for the press photo package and I don't know where anything is. That was also my brother. You are being incredibly selfish. That was Diane, which told me she'd found the voicemail wasn't working. My mom came to my apartment on day 4. I knew she would. She knocked 3 times in the pattern she'd used since I was a kid, and I stood in my kitchen for a moment before opening the door. She came in, looked at the apartment the way she always did, scanning for evidence that I wasn't taking care of myself, and sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. She started with, I know you feel left out. I said, Mom, I was told to come work in the kitchen. She looked uncomfortable. Diane didn't mean it like that. She's just protective of Marcus. You know how brides get. She's not the bride yet, I said. And the bride's preferences don't override the fact that I own the IP on everything he's built the restaurant around. Intellectual property, the logo, the website, the Instagram account, the menus, all of it was created by my company. My company hasn't been paid. My company hasn't signed a transfer agreement. So technically, Oleander doesn't own any of it. My mom stared at me. But your family. And there it was. The load-bearing sentence. The reason the spreadsheet in my work drive had grown to the size it had. Because family was the reason you didn't send a contract. Family was the reason you absorbed the revisions and the credit reassignment and the font swap without a word. Family was the reason you kept saying yes until the people you were saying yes to forgot that you had another answer available. Family, I said, is exactly why I should have set this up correctly from the beginning. I didn't. So we're setting it up now. She left without resolving anything, which I expected. What I didn't expect was the call I got the following evening from my brother. Alone. No one else on the line. He sounded tired. Not angry, tired. Which was different and harder to deal with. Diane found a design agency that says they can recreate the brand assets in 10 days for a rush fee, he said. But it's going to cost me $12,000 I don't have, and honestly the stuff they showed me looks like every other restaurant in Austin. I didn't say anything. I know she handled the guest thing badly, he said. I told her she should have talked to me first. I told her that. What did she say? A pause. She said you've always been difficult about boundaries. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because it was so precisely backward that my brain didn't have another response. Marcus, I said, I have been nothing but accommodating. I worked on your brand for 8 months. I invoiced you twice, and you said you'd handle it when cash flow stabilized. I never pushed. And then, your fiancé decided I was staff instead of family, and apparently you didn't push back on that either. He was quiet. I want the restaurant to succeed, I said. I genuinely do. But I need you to understand what you're asking me to absorb here. I'm not asking for an apology from her. I'm asking you to acknowledge what happened. His voice was quieter when he answered. I know what happened, Maya. I saw it happening and I told myself you were fine with it. That was easier than dealing with it. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Something that sounded like my actual brother. Under all the stress and the new relationship and the restaurant. "Come to the opening," he said. "As a guest. I'll talk to Diane." I thought about it. "What about the accounts and the assets?" "I'm going to pay you," he said. "I know I haven't. I'll start a payment plan this week, and I'll get the ownership paperwork drafted properly, whatever you need." "I need a contract," I said, "with my actual company name on it." "Okay. And I need you to tell me yourself. Not Diane. You. You're a guest at the opening," he said. "My sister. Not staff. Not the vendor. My sister." I let that sit for a second. "I'll restore the accounts tonight." The opening of Oleander was on a Saturday in October, when the weather in Austin had finally cooled to something bearable. The restaurant sat in a renovated craftsman bungalow on South Congress, and I'll say this when I walked up and saw the sign I'd designed illuminated above the door, the terracotta letters warm against the evening light. Something moved in my chest in a way I hadn't let myself expect. My brother had texted me that afternoon. "It looks exactly like what you drew. I want you to know I see that." I wore a dress. Nothing formal, just something I liked, because I was a guest, and I'd earned the right to wear something I liked. The restaurant was full by 7. Local food writers, neighborhood regulars who'd been following the Instagram account for months, a cluster of my brother's former finance colleagues who looked slightly unsure why they were at a restaurant instead of a bar but were being won over by the cocktail menu. My parents were there, my mom wearing the expression she wore when she was proud of something she couldn't quite bring herself to say out loud. Diane was everywhere, working the room the way she worked every room, precise and charming in a red dress. When she saw me at the door, something moved behind her eyes, not warmth, exactly, but an acknowledgement. She came over. "I'm glad you came," she said, which was the most she was willing to give, and I knew it. "Thank you for having me," I said, which was the most I was willing to give back. We weren't going to be friends. That was a fact I'd made peace with on the walk over. But we were both people who were going to be in my brother's life. And we were going to have to figure out how to stand in the same room without making him choose. That was enough for tonight. My brother found me about 30 minutes in, near the bar, talking to a woman who turned out to be the Chronicle writer who'd done the feature. She was asking him about the brand direction, about the visual identity, about how he'd landed on the concept. He looked at me, then back at her. "My sister designed everything," he said. "She's been doing it for 8 months. She runs a design company called Reeves Creative. She's the reason any of this looks the way it does." The writer looked at me with new interest. "Really? I didn't know that for the first piece. Can I get your information?" I handed her a card. The kind with my company name on it. The design I'd spent a whole weekend getting right 2 years ago. I won't pretend the evening was perfect. There was a moment near the end of the night when Diane made a comment to a group of guests about how the whole team had been involved in developing the brand, and I felt the familiar flicker of something sharp under my sternum. But I let it pass. Not because it didn't matter, but because I'd already made the change that mattered. The one that couldn't be undone by a casual comment at a party. My name was in the building. Not in the article yet, not on the wall, but in the contract I'd drafted and my brother had signed the week before, the one that transferred ownership of the brand assets to Oleander LLC in exchange for a payment plan and a proper creative credit clause. My work was legally, formally, documented as mine. Outside, around 11, when the crowd had thinned, my brother found me at the small patio table where I'd retreated with a glass of wine and my shoes off. He sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a minute. "The Chronicle writer asked for your portfolio," he said finally. "I know. She already emailed." He nodded, looking out at the street. "I've been thinking about what you said. About seeing it happening and telling yourself I was fine with it. Marcus. No, let me say it." He turned toward me. "I did that. Not just with the opening. For a long time. Dad used to do the same thing with your art, with your business. Treat it like a phase or a favor, and I picked that up without noticing. You were just Maya who does the graphic stuff, and I never had to examine what that meant because you never said anything." "I said things," I said quietly. "You did," he said. "I just wasn't listening." That was the sentence I hadn't known I needed. Not an apology exactly, though it was that too. Just the admission that something had been happening, that it had been real, that I wasn't the dramatic one for noticing. "I want you to be part of this," he said. Legitimately. Not as a vendor I'm slow paying or a sister I'm taking for granted. If there's a phase 2, an expansion, a second location someday, I want to build that with you properly. Budget included. With a contract from day one, I said. With a contract from day one, he agreed. We stayed out there for a while. The noise of the restaurant behind us, the street quiet with the kind of specific Austin quiet that happens when a Friday night finally exhales. At some point my mom came out, looked at the two of us, and sat down without asking, the way she always did in the moments that mattered. She didn't say anything grand. She just reached over and put her hand on mine for a second, which was more than I expected, and maybe more than she knew how to give. "I'm not going to tell you everything is fixed. It isn't. Not the way stories wrap up in the last 3 minutes. Diane and I still move carefully around each other, which is probably how it's going to be for a while. My dad still calls my business computer stuff sometimes, and I've stopped correcting him because that particular habit is load-bearing in a way I've decided not to dismantle right now. There are years of patterns that don't dissolve in one conversation at a restaurant patio. But I'm in the building, literally and otherwise." 3 weeks after the opening, the Chronicle ran a follow-up piece on Oleander's first month. In it, the writer described the restaurant's brand identity as one of the most cohesive she'd seen from a new independent restaurant in Austin. She credited Reeves Creative by name. She spelled it right. My brother texted me the link at 6 in the morning with 3 words. "That's all you." I read it twice, the way I'd read Diane's text that night in my studio, but this time I sat with it, let it reach the nerve, and felt the thing it was supposed to feel like. The first payment from the payment plan had already landed in my business account. The transfer agreement was filed. The Instagram account had 4,800 followers, and I was still the one managing the content strategy. Except now, there was an invoice for it, due on the 1st of every month, and it got paid. I don't know what you would have done. If your brother called you at the end of a long day and said he needed your help, and you loved him, would you have paused long enough to protect yourself? Or would you have done what I did for 8 months, which was say yes first and negotiate never? That's not a criticism. I know why I did it. I wanted to be needed in a way that also meant valued, and for a long time I believed they were the same thing. The work was how I proved I belonged in my own family's story. And they let me believe that because it was convenient, and I let myself believe it because the alternative that I had to assert my own worth, rather than perform my way into it, felt frightening in a way I couldn't name. What I know now is that love and utility aren't the same thing. Being useful to people isn't the same as being seen by them. You can build someone's entire world and still be invisible in it if you never once said, "This is what I'm worth, this is what I need, this is the line." The line isn't cruel. It isn't dramatic. It's the thing that separates a relationship from an arrangement. And I'm learning, slowly, to guard it. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but with more intention than I had before. And with paperwork. Always now, with paperwork. So tell me, what would you have done? At what point do you stop absorbing the cost of being needed by people who forget you're a person? Where's your line? Because I think a lot of us have a version of that folder on our hard drives. The one titled with some quiet, private joke about what our time has been worth to the people who know us best. The one we've been updating for years without sending the invoice. I finally sent mine, and the view from the other side of it is cleaner than I expected.